Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a real-life geopolitical thriller. We are going to look at some of the most heavily armed, incredibly wealthy nations on Earth, the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC countries, and uncover exactly why they refuse to fire a single bullet back at Iran, even when they're facing intense, direct provocation. So let's just jump right in.
To really wrap our heads around this mystery, we've got to ask what is arguably the most baffling question on the global stage right now. Why do nations with basically limitless wealth and access to the absolute most advanced militaries money can buy just allow themselves to be attacked without launching a massive retaliation? It totally flips everything we assume about power and warfare right on its head.
Part 1. The strange silence. $58 billion. Let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering amount of economic damage the Gulf nations have quietly absorbed from attacks. 58 billion. And yet, not a single direct counteroffensive against Iranian territory. They have literally just absorbed the blow.
You see, Iran has systematically targeted the Gulf's absolute true weakness, their economic lifelines. And we aren't just talking about tiny border skirmishes here. We are talking about a devastating $20 billion strike on Qatar's gas infrastructure, something that's going to take 4 full years to recover from. We're talking about direct strikes on the UAE's Fujairah port. And, of course, the current Red Sea blockades that are bleeding $500,000 every single day. Crazy, right? Yet, the GCC just remains completely passive.
Moving on to Section 2, Wealth over War. Think about what the GCC has spent the last 30 years building. It's this glittering, incredibly fragile ecosystem. Glass cities that are heavily reliant on tourism, civil aviation, and international capital. It's an entire economic model built entirely on peace. Iran, on the other hand, has completely mastered gritty, asymmetric warfare. They dominate geographic choke points, they fund proxy militias, and they heavily utilize cheap, expendable drones. And as it turns out, glass cities are terrifyingly vulnerable to cheap drones.
Plus, we really have to talk about who actually lives in those glass cities. The Gulf's prosperity is 100% reliant on foreign labor. Think about this. There are 9 million Indian expats living in the GCC, with 3.3 million in the UAE alone. The native populations, like the Emiratis for example, are incredibly small. They simply don't have the native, willing manpower to fight a brutal, drawn-out ground war. You literally cannot ask a foreign workforce to fight a geopolitical war for you.
Which brings us to Section 3, the vulnerability paradox.
So how exactly does having all the money in the world actually create a devastating weakness? Well, the sheer demographic disadvantage is pretty terrifying. Iran boasts a massive population of 9.5 crore. That's 95 million people. Meanwhile, the entire GCC combined, all 6 nations, has only 6.5 crore, or 65 million people. And remember, a huge chunk of that 65 million are those expatriate workers we just talked about. In a pure numbers game, the Gulf is vastly outmatched.
And this leads perfectly into asymmetric warfare. Iran executes this flawlessly. It's a classic David and Goliath situation, but twisted. They launch low-cost drones from their rugged 1,800-kilometer mountainous coastline along the Strait of Hormuz. And these super cheap drones just completely overwhelm the Gulf's incredibly expensive imported defense interceptors. Because think about it, when it costs you millions of dollars to shoot down a $2,000 drone, you are fundamentally losing the war of attrition, no matter how deep your pockets are. But wait a minute, weren't they super wealthy nations supposed to be protected by the world's greatest superpower?
Let's look at Section 4, America's Broken Promises.
Right now, there are 45,000 American troops stationed across these GCC countries. For decades, the Gulf nations mistakenly believed that this massive American footprint was an unbreakable security shield. They basically thought, hey, if we host U.S. bases, the U.S. is going to fight our wars. But man, that cinematic illusion of American protection shattered, and it shattered hard. The real wake-up call came back in 2019, when Saudi oil facilities were devastatingly attacked, and the U.S. air defense systems completely failed to intercept the threat. Fast forward to recently, and the U.S. abruptly hits pause on Operation Freedom, which was the mission to clear Red Sea shipping lanes, simply because they needed to prioritize protecting their own naval armada and Israel. They basically left the Gulf's economic lifelines to bleed. So what actually went wrong? Why did this ultimate shield fail? Well, America fundamentally underestimated Iran's low-cost drone swarms. Fascinatingly, they even initially refused advanced counter-drone training and technology offered by Ukraine, who, by the way, had already mastered fighting these exact kinds of drones, all because of internal armed lobbying. But here is the most chilling realization for the GCC. Those U.S. bases didn't act like a shield at all. Instead, they acted like giant, flashing bullseyes. By hosting the Americans, the GCC nations realized they were practically inviting Iranian retaliation right onto their own soil. So, with America proving to be a pretty risky protector, a new superpower is quietly stepping on to this shifting geopolitical chessboard.
All right, Section 5. Enter the Dragon.
We are watching a massive paradigm shift play out in real time. If the presence of American troops is suddenly a liability that invites strikes rather than deters them, the Gulf nations are inevitably going to look east for a new guardian. They desperately need someone who can actually guarantee peace, not just sell them more expensive weapons.
Enter China, waiting right in the wings. China already holds a massive $400 billion oil import deal with Iran. And because China has that immense leverage over Iran's economy, they are perfectly positioned to step in, potentially build their own regional naval bases, and basically strong-arm a peace deal that America just couldn't pull off. Think about it. If China sets up bases, Iran isn't going to strike them, bringing a forced stability to the whole region. But every great thriller has a plot twist, right? And the ultimate twist here isn't just an external threat from Iran or some shifting superpowers. It's a silent collapse happening from the inside.
Which leads us to our final chapter, Section 6, Fractures from Within.
Because here's the real kicker. This supposedly united GCC, behind closed doors, it is falling apart. Oman actually sent congratulations to Iran's new military leadership, which, let's be honest, is a wildly awkward postcard to send while your neighbors are actively under threat. Meanwhile, the UAE and Bahrain have seriously angered their peers, and Iran, by heavily pivoting toward Israel via the Abraham Accords. And simmering behind all of this is a fierce leadership battle. The UAE is aggressively refusing to stay in Saudi Arabia's political and economic shadow anymore. And the ultimate battleground where you see this division is oil. It's a ticking clock. Saudi Arabia desperately demands strict OPEC quotas to artificially restrict supply and keep global oil prices sky high. But the UAE, they see the renewable energy transition coming like a freight train. They've broken ranks, deciding to pump a massive 5 million barrels a day right now. They want to sell every single drop they can before those vast reserves become completely obsolete, even if it totally tanks Saudi Arabia's strategy. And why does this matter to you and me? Because this internal family feud over millions of barrels literally dictates global energy markets. It directly impacts the prices you see every single day as the world races toward renewables.
Which leaves us with one final, kind of chilling thought as we wrap up this explainer. We've seen their mind-blowing wealth, their geographic vulnerabilities, the utter failure of their American shield, and the quiet, steady rise of China. But as global superpowers shift around them and deep internal loyalties completely crumble over the dying age of oil, we really have to ask, will the Gulf Cooperation Council even survive the incredible pressures of the next decade? Or are we quietly watching the slow collapse of a modern empire? Something to think about. Catch you in the next explainer.